If you'd like to turn in your Bibles to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. I've been thinking, especially this weekend, just how thankful I am for this church family in a lot of different ways. Really, I'm appreciative of everyone who has been a part of Nathan and Macy's relationship as that's kind of grown and as they started dating and then now into marriage. And I think of the time they've had with the college class and with Kyle and leadership there and just this church family as a whole. And then the great shower they had a few weeks back that has filled our office at our house with tons of stuff that's finally gone into another house now. And then yesterday, as a lot of you were there and a part of the wedding, some of you helping set up, clean up, sound, serving, all kinds of things like that. And then some of you just being here to be a part of that day. Thankful for all of you. And for all of you who couldn't come for whatever reason, I'm thankful for you too, because of you, there are lots of soft pretzels and cake in my refrigerator right now. So you would have eaten that yesterday and you didn't need it at all, and I'm glad it's in our fridge. And I'm also thankful for our friends the Grady's, even though they took me out of my seat this morning. Rachel was finishing her freshman year of high school when I became her youth minister in Searcy, and survived that somehow, and never would have imagined that this youth group kid long ago would bake the cake for my son's wedding. And she and her mom worked on that, brought the whole family over, and we're thankful for just church relationships all over the place, of people that have impacted our lives somewhere along the way, and God has connected us. And those are kind of the things that matter in this life. So today, if you're visiting, as obviously some of you are, we have been working our way through the Gospel of Mark. We're heading toward the crucifixion and resurrection here late next month. But I want to remind us of kind of what leads to the context of what we're going to talk about today. So if we remember back a couple weeks, the Pharisees asked this question to Jesus about, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? And it is not the way we wanted everyone serving cake and pretzels to wash their hands first yesterday. It is a ceremonial kind of cleansing spiritually that they were taking part in. And there was a lot there about the Pharisees just had this tendency to notice the things on the outside and not to see what was within. They were very caught up on appearances, and they forgot about what the point of all those things was in the first place. And then last time we looked in chapter 8 about what it costs to be a disciple of Jesus. And that's a theme that comes up from time to time in the Gospels, but we learn that there is a great reward that comes with being a follower of Jesus, but at the same time, there are a lot of difficulties that come along too. There is, for us, maybe being misunderstood, or people think we're crazy, or any number of things. And for the disciples who would have heard that for the first time, quite literally, it could have cost them their lives. And for many of them, it did. So there is a cost involved. And then as we get into chapter 9, the part we're skipping over, Jesus goes up on the mountainside, and there Moses and Elijah appear alongside him, and his face is shining like the sun. And again, like I talked about last time, I'd love to have the Hastings DVD section to understand exactly what all of this looked like. But if you were the few disciples who were on the mountain with him in that moment, you would probably feel like, I can't believe I got to see this. I can't believe I was a part of this. And that would be one of those things where we all probably have stories like that, where you encountered someone important or someone famous and you want to tell someone about it later. I was in Malibu, California, probably 12 years ago now, sitting at a coffee shop when Martin Sheen walked in. And if you're probably, the younger crowd has no idea, President on the West Wing, maybe that helps. He walked in, and I have told so many people about being there at the coffee shop when Martin Sheen walked in and nodded at me. And I thought, well, we have a connection now. For these disciples up there with Jesus who see this, it's this incredible moment. And then they come back down off of the mountain and they find chaos. And the chaos happening at the base of the mountain is, here's this guy who has a demon-possessed son, and he wants this son to be healed, and the disciples who were not on the mountain have been trying. And I just imagine this entire scene where they feel like they can do this and they're just not doing it. And I imagine, one of the other disciples kind of egging them on, saying, maybe you're just not saying the words right, let me try. And all of this is happening, and Jesus comes down and encounters this just chaos going on and steps in to help. And he gets this guy healed, and his life is changed forever. And in the midst of that, we find ourselves in the last half of the chapter here, in Mark chapter 9. It says they went on from there, from this site of the healing and all these things going on, and passed through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples. He wants some time with the disciples to maybe have a little more focused in teaching. And he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise." But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. So what we're going to find here in this part of the chapter is a couple times that we're introduced the idea of the disciples having some thoughts, but not wanting to say anything for one reason or another. So Jesus tells them what's going to happen to him. They don't understand exactly what it's all about, and they are afraid to ask. For most of us, when we are afraid to ask a question, it doesn't serve us well. Usually there's something where we need to know more, we want to know more, we don't want to seem like the one who doesn't know, we don't want to admit we're ignorant on this, and so we don't want to say anything. And the disciples are no different than us here. So they have heard something that they don't quite know what to do with, and if we'll remember back to Peter's confession last time, that when Peter heard that and then ongoing has Jesus talking about what's going to happen to him, Peter doesn't want to hear that part. And Peter rebukes him for what he has said. They don't like the idea of Jesus dying, but they're afraid to ask more about it. Then it continues in Mark 9:33. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" I think back to youth group days of, I was trying to think earlier how many different states Rachel and I have probably visited on church buses over many years to mission trips and activities and things like that. And when you're up there driving the church bus, you hear a lot of conversations behind you. And some of them you can hear, some of them, you hear little bits and pieces. Some of them you hear enough to know, well, I know what I need to teach about next Sunday. There's all kinds of stuff going on back there. Jesus, I believe, as we talked about his questions last time, he knows the answer before he's asked. But Jesus asked them, "What were you discussing along the way?" But they kept silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. Like you do when someone has just told you they're going to die because of what they're doing, then you should naturally have a discussion about who's most important. So they're having this discussion about who's the greatest. The first time they didn't speak, they're afraid, and they don't know what to do. Here, they're ashamed, because they know the thing they have been talking about was not important. It should not have been a topic of discussion, and yet here it was. I love that in class this morning we were talking about the 23rd Psalm and the idea of not wanting. These are people that, even though they are literally following the Son of God around for these 3 years, still want more. They want to be the most important ones there. And I would imagine in part of this discussion you might have Peter saying, "Well, I don't remember all 12 of us being up on the mountain watching his face shine like the sun. So I guess 9 of you at least are out just immediately." All of them have these different reasons why they may think they're the most important, but they're ashamed to speak. So then in verse 35a, the first half of the verse, he says this, "And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them." I think this is Jesus taking a moment to refocus these people on what they're thinking and what they're doing. I was thinking about one of the many mission trips that we took in the youth group. We went to Michigan. And I think Rachel was on this one, actually. We went to Michigan, and we're there to do a vacation Bible school. I walk into the basement of the church building, and there is a kindergarten class that 3 of our kids are teaching. And 3 kids that are teaching, one of them is an older kid, 2 of them, I believe, were junior high kids, if I remember right. And I walk into the room. I'm just walking around taking pictures, observing, that kind of stuff. I open the door to the room, and I see the chaos that Jesus saw at the bottom of the mountain, minus the demon-possessed guy, I guess. It's insane in there. Kids are running around. Kids are just doing all kinds of stuff. And then I look to our 3 teachers, the authority figures in the room, I think a 10th grader and a couple of 8th graders, if I remember right, who are arguing with each other in one corner of the room. And I thought, what in the world is going, this is not what we taught you. This is not what my wife taught you to do. This is not what should be going on right now. And so I pulled them out in the hallway, and I laid into them. I just really let them have it in the hallway, probably a little harder than definitely a little harder than I should have. I then left after I did that, and someone came to me in another hallway and said, "Why are they crying in the hallway?" And I realized I was probably a little too harsh here, but it was this kind of a moment. And the thing I said to them is maybe the way that maybe Jesus might word it in modern day times, the idea of, what are we here to do? You know, I open the door to the room, and what I see is kids going crazy, and you three in the corner arguing with each other. What are you here to do? And if part of that is argue with each other, could that happen at a different time when you are not supposed to be teaching the kids that we've been prepping for the last several months to get here? And to me, it made complete sense. I was probably much harsher than that with them at the time. For Jesus, after he's had a couple chapters now of explaining to them what this is all about, it's kind of that moment of, what are we here for? Are we here to have questions within you that you're not willing to ask because you're scared? Are we here to argue about who's the most important? Because that's not what it's about at all. What is it that we're here for? They need to refocus on what matters. They need to change their attitude. They need to change their posture towards other people. They need to change the way they're thinking and what they're doing. They need to refocus on what matters. So I think what Jesus is going to do here for us in the last part of this is to show us what it is to focus as followers of Jesus. What should be our focus? And let me just say on the front end, anytime you make a list of what should be the focus of somebody who follows Jesus, you're going to leave something out. And so if you have 3 other things, that's okay. They may or may not be in this chapter, and there are other things that we need to focus on too. But I would definitely submit to you it's not an argument about who's the most important. That's not one of them. So what should be the focus of a follower of Jesus? So continuing, maybe. There we go. It says he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. So first of all, as followers of Jesus, we need to be last and put others first. And that is everything that our world is not about. Our world is about making sure that you are seen and noticed and recognized, and that you have everything you want in the way that you want it and in the time that you want it. And if people get in your way, you climb over them, you push them out of the way, you just get the thing you want. And Jesus says, that's not how it works for us. You need to be people who are willing to be last and put others ahead of you. I watched a video a couple weeks ago of a high school track meet. And in this track meet, there were 2 people that were kind of ahead of the rest of the pack, and they were nearing the finish line, and they looked to be, believe it or not, I don't understand distances in track, they looked to be maybe 50 to 100 yards from the finish line. And the girl who was in the lead and would have won the race if the pace had stayed the same collapsed. She just, energy was all gone. And the girl who was behind her had a moment to decide, what am I going to do? Or maybe she didn't have a moment to decide that. Maybe that's just who she is, and there's no decision to be made. Our world would say, you have lucked out. The competition is down, blow on by, win the race, be done. This girl slows down, stops, picks the other girl up, high schooler, picks the other girl up, puts her arm around her and carries her to the finish line, making sure she was still ahead as they crossed. And I thought, wow, isn't that what life is supposed to be like for us? That when we find people who are struggling, that need help, that we're willing to put them ahead of ourselves. That when there is something we want, whether it is justified or not, that if it gets in the way of other people, that we are willing to try to put other people ahead of ourselves. Be last, put others first. He continues, verse 36. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. Now, I think for us in church life, this is a little difficult for us to wrap our heads around because we like kids. If you're here visiting this morning and you've not been here before, we love kids. Periodically, someone will freak out in here and get really loud, and their parents will take them out. And someone will ask me, if that threw me off, and it's very rare for that. Noises happen. Yesterday at the wedding, we had 2 babies come down in a wagon, and one of those babies loves to scream. And I was just thinking, please no. And as they come down the aisle, everyone's and it's so cute and all of those things. And right about the point he gets here and he sees his lolly right here on the front, then suddenly he lets out the scream because he's excited. And it was kind of a cute moment and everybody laughed. If you were in the first century, that would be incredibly bothersome. People didn't put up with kids in the first century. They didn't value kids the way we do. And honestly, there's probably some shift in culture with that right now, where I see people talk about dogs on airplanes right now. And there are people that love that and people that hate that. And I've seen so many people comment, at least it's not a screaming toddler. And I thought, we're hitting the point where we're starting to value the dog more than the kid somewhere along the way. This is probably where they were. They didn't value dogs or kids, I guess, back then. But they didn't place the value. And so when he says to be like this child, to value this child, Jesus shows us that we value those who society does not. And I don't know who you put in this box, but I would guess for all of us, there's somebody. There are struggles with immigration and things like that within our nation right now. How do you feel about people regardless of where they came from and how they got here? I get the legality, but how do you feel about the people as a Christian? There are people who have less than you and people who have more than you. And there was a time where everybody just looked down on the people on the less side. I think people look down on both sides now. You're really upset with people who are poor, really upset with people who are rich, and Jesus would say to us, you value people who society does not value. Could be kids, could be any number of people. We value those who society does not. Then John said to him, Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us. We've got this guy out there, he's casting out demons, doing things, but he's not doing it the way that we do it. He's not with us. But Jesus said, do not stop him. For no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. We don't need to make everything into a competition. And I'd like to think that it's just us in Churches of Christ that do this sometimes. I think a lot of religious groups do this kind of thing. I heard a report just last week about work going on in Nicaragua and about the number of baptisms that were happening at different churches. And I found myself kind of feeling a little awkward as it was being talked about because there were so many baptisms, which, don't get me wrong, I rejoice in, and I'm glad there are so many baptisms. And then I look at us and I think, I wish we had that many baptisms. And I don't think it's not because we're not trying. It's just one of those things that Nicaragua and the nature of it and what's going on there, there are people who are just really thirsting for God and thirsting for these things. And the society we live in is kind of different. It takes a little more effort, a little different methods sometimes to get there. It's easy for me to hear those things and just get competitive about it. For the disciples, they see these people doing these things, having, by the way, just earlier in the chapter, come off of a moment where they could not heal this guy, and they're a little put off by it, and they don't know what to do, and so they're frustrated. Don't make all things into a competition. Some people have more than you, some people have less than you. Churches are a little different. Don't make everything into a competition. Verse 40, for the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink, if you've ever wondered where that comes from in that one song that we sing, by the way, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward. So basically, I think the language for us is that we need to be people who notice agreement, not just differences. And that's a challenge because people tend to point out the differences first. You go to the Church of Christ, aren't you those people who don't have instruments? Or usually, aren't you those people who don't have music? And then you will say, well, we sing, and that's music and anyway. Aren't you those people that think you have to be baptized? Aren't you those people that? Aren't you those people that? And if instead, what if we started at a point of similarity? We're those people who believe in Jesus and try to love our neighbor. Not that we don't do all those other things too, or not do some of those other things too, but what if we could find our common ground first and then begin to work from there? There are times, by the way, that I think we see that and we're pretty good at it. I see people share things on Facebook all the time that did not originate in Churches of Christ, but are very godly ideas, straight from Scripture that come from another place. We need to see agreement. And as our world continues to get less godly, which I believe it will, as our world continues to go that route, it's important for us to notice the places where we have alignment. So notice our agreement, not just our differences. Verse 42, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. And by the way, I didn't put a picture up here today, but if you want to Google millstone and see what we're talking about, it's those big, gigantic stones that are larger than you are. Imagine that being tied around your neck and you're thrown into the sea. You're pretty hopeless at that point. If you cause one to sin, you would be better off with that. So for us to say that your actions affect others, whatever you do and you feel like, well, this is just me and God, this is just between me and whoever, it's not going to hurt anybody, know that the things you do affect other people. Be aware, or after class I should have said be alert, I guess. Be aware of what it is that you're doing. It can have a positive or a negative impact. Try to be positive. Try to do things that encourage and help others along. Verse 43, and if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. In verse 47, and if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell. By the way, if you've noticed the even verses were missing there a couple times, if you have a modern translation, you probably have a footnote that verses 44 and 46 are gone. They're the same as verse 48. Scribes somewhere along the way added those back just aside. Where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. So sin is a serious problem avoided at all costs. When you're talking about gouging out eyes and cutting off hands and things like that, that is a pretty serious deal. So if there is a sin problem that you have, you need to take extreme measures to do something about that. It's not going to just get better on its own, especially if you have a sin problem that resurfaces and resurfaces and you think you've kicked it and 2 years down the road it resurfaces again. Take that seriously. Handle that the way that people who are trying to overcome something like alcoholism understand that they don't need to go to a restaurant and sit by the bar, or they don't need to be in these particular places at these times, or they have to be careful around holidays or whatever it may be. You cut those things out of your life because sin is that important. So sin matters, and take it seriously. And then one of the most interesting verses, I think, in the book of Mark. For everyone will be salted with fire. Now, I looked, and even one of the commentaries I read, by the way, said there are 12 different opinions on this in commentaries. And there really are. There are all kinds of thoughts about what this means. I think there are 2 that are kind of the most popular. One of them being, if you were to look in Leviticus 2, I think it's verse 13, talking about the sacrifices that are to be made. The writer there says that the sacrifices are salted. And so this would connect with these people who are from Jewish heritage, the idea that this is something that is sacrificial in your life, to be salt. And then there's probably the more classical sense that we see of Jesus calling us to be salt and light. We are people that are trying to be salt, and sometimes that is going to come with difficulty. And so the idea of fire being something that refines us, we need to understand that following Jesus requires sacrifice. If we do this the right way, it's going to make life more difficult for us at times. It's going to make us less acceptable to society around us at times. We are to be, as Paul says in Romans, living sacrifices. Following Jesus requires sacrifice. And then lastly, in verse 50, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. So first of all, stay the course. Have salt in yourself. Don't be one who loses the saltiness, which is to say, keep on keeping on. Stay the course. And then strive for peace and unity. I don't think a group of people who has just heard about what Jesus is going to do, and they're then having an argument about who's most important, I don't think that group of people is striving for peace and unity. I don't think a group of people who is talking about another group and what's wrong with them and how we're better, I don't think we're striving for peace and unity. I don't think that if we are thinking of ourselves first and not others, that we're people that are striving for peace and for unity. And what does Jesus ask of us? Strive for peace and unity. And if we were preaching through the Gospel of John instead of the Gospel of Mark, we would find in chapter 17, he prays about the same thing just before he dies. That we would be people who had peace and unity within our lives, within our world, within our church. And as I said at the beginning when we started, I think we have a lot of that here. I love this church family. I think this is a place where there is peace and there is unity. When I was thinking about Nathan and Macy getting married yesterday, I thought of all the stories I've heard about preachers' kids and how difficult church is for preachers' kids sometimes, and how there's really not a thing here that I can think of that would make them feel negative about the church based on our relationship with each other, my relationship with people who have worked here or currently work here, people who have been leaders here or are currently leaders here. There is peace and unity here. And if you're visiting today and you've struggled with church over the years because you have not found that to be true, I think you'll find that here. I think it's a place where we strive for that. Today, if you have never followed Jesus before, this is just a piece of what that is. But I think it's an important piece. We are people that want to be humble, people that want to put ourselves last and put others ahead of ourselves, and people who really want to look for the good in those around us, want to notice the people others don't notice. And we notice you. We want you to be a part of that family. You can be baptized into Him. Your life can be changed today. Or if you have walked away from that for any number of reasons, maybe you've been in too many arguments about who's the most important, and that just is not another thing you need in your life. We don't want church to be about that. We want it to be a place where you can come and be a follower of Jesus and to know the God who loves you so much. If there's some way we can help you with that today, you can come to the front or to the back to one of our elders as we stand and sing.